Holding on to pain and resentment from the experiences that we have in our life can be a draining and time-consuming experience. So today I want to talk about forgiveness, and not in the sense that, oh, forgiveness, you want to get rid of whatever the other person did. Not that kind of forgiveness. And I think of forgiveness in a different way. Forgiveness is more for you and not for the other person, because what happens when we hold on to those experiences? Well, it takes up time in our mind, and it takes up space and negative emotion, which the more we hold on to negative, the more negative we naturally become. So obviously we might not want to hold on to those experiences. And again, it's a back and forth thing, because anger and negative emotions can be addicting, and it can make us want to stay in those spaces. So you'll have to forgive me for the sniffles in this video and lesson, whatever. It got really cold here, and apparently my body doesn't like that, so now I'm sniffly. Yay me. But from what I've seen and experienced, there's two ways that I know of, and it's more or less one way, but the first way ties into the second way in a way that I think adds on to it. And the first way is a little bit easier, and I won't say easier, but it's more simple and direct rather than having to dig inside of yourself for the second one. So the first one is you take the full situation and you understand why and what happened on a deeper level than you might experience or you might have the perspective of now. So think of it as a big circle, and that's the situation, and then you have one outlook on it. And this is when more than one person is involved, right? So we have your perspective on the situation, we have the other person's perspective on the situation, and if there's more, they have more perspectives on the situation, right? And some people could be lying, some people could be telling the truth. It's mumbo jumbo, right? So if we're looking at this situation and you have your perspective, and let's say someone said something that hurt you, or someone did something physically, or say in a business perspective, they came in and just wiped away all the work you did, and now you're like, I hate this guy. This is horrible. I would never want this again, right? So maybe that's the situation. And then you're like, well, why did that happen? Because as of right now, you think the other person's just a piece of garbage, right? So the first way is, if you want to understand what happened from all perspectives, get a bigger picture, then you obviously go and address the other person, which is why it's maybe not so easy to do, because a lot of people don't like confrontation, but it just kind of depends on the person. Me, in my situations, I do like to confront the person because that's just who I am. So I'll go confront the person, say, hey, this is what happened. Is this what you meant by this? Or how did you look at the situation? And so if you can do that with every person in a situation, say you have a board meeting or something, or you're meeting with some coworkers, stuff like that, you get together with them and you go over what happened. Then, now you're looking at the same situation, but you have multiple different perspectives. You're taking an outside-in perspective rather than just being so focused on just what you experienced in that situation. And so what this does is it broadens the scope of what you have in your mind about what happened, what you feel, stuff like that. Helps you understand what happened in the experiences of other people. And typically, what I've noticed is if there was a miscommunication or was a misunderstanding, you can usually situate that out with the person, and then all of a sudden, boom, no more frustration, anger, resentment, stuff like that. Now, if you, and we'll get into some other, because that's not the only solution for that, but from what I've seen, if you can understand everyone's perspective, it broadens your understanding, and then it kind of naturally just takes away the anger and the frustration. So like with my Nana, and I'll talk about this too in another episode, I used to have a lot of anger and hatred towards her as we were growing up. And for context, I was adopted by her. And by going in that situation, I had a lot of anger, a lot of hatred. And then eventually, something clicked in my head, and I think I was like 16 or 17 when this happened. And I was like, oh, she is who she is because of the past experiences that she had, and those shaped the worries and the struggles that she has in her head now. And while that doesn't excuse what happened, it helped me at least understand what she's doing is not all my fault. And it's not coming out of a place of anger or hatred towards me. She loves me, and this is what she thought would be the best way of handling it. Now, was it? Arguably not. And it caused a lot of stress, a lot of distress, stuff like that when I was younger. But I finally understood it, and all of a sudden, instead of the hate and the anger that I felt a want to help her and improve upon her life. And I still, again, I'll talk about this later, but I still want to help her, and I haven't done exactly what I want to do yet, but it's going to take time, right? And it's also part of where I got the love to want to help people change. And that's what I really enjoy, right? So that's part of my whole life story. And so once I understood what exactly was going on in that situation outside of my own perspective, it turned my hate and resentment into a love for my grandmother, right? So that's just one of the possible kind of outcomes that you can get, right? And then another one, because I know that a lot of people don't forgive themselves for things, is if you're in a situation where you did something and you don't know if you can forgive yourself, and if you're struggling with that as well, well, how can we look at that? Well, this is where you have to kind of pull up your pants to be willing to go deeper into your own mind, because now we have to understand why you made that decision in the past, like this, whatever most recent time you did it, and understand why you're so upset with it now, right? And it's specific to everyone, right? Depending on your morals, your values, stuff like that. So if we go in and look and be like, hey, I did this thing, I wasn't very happy about it. Well, why did you do that thing? What were the events leading up to that situation that ultimately led to you making that decision? And the reason why I say the leading up to it is because something happened to make you feel comfortable making that decision. Often, the problem isn't in that decision itself, it's leading up to that decision. Because if we just look at the decision and solve for the decision, it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid, right? Or something that's not as effective. So let's say I want to stop looking at naked people on the internet, right? If you just look at the emotion that you had then, you're like, okay, I just won't do anything. Well, that doesn't really work all the time, does it? No. But what you can do is look at the events leading up to it. What caused me to feel that type of way that led to that decision? Well, to put it simply, in this case, if I get bored, then maybe I get horny, then maybe I want to look at some stuff, right? So now we got to solve for the boredom, or a substitute for the boredom, because we know that boredom leads to the emotion that leads to the action, okay? And so that's kind of perspective we want to take on this forgiving of ourselves. We made a decision that we don't like, but what were the events leading up to that decision? And if we can talk about those, get to the bottom of those, then we can figure out, hey, this is what happened, this is what led to that situation, so maybe we can avoid that next time. But we also want to understand not only what led to that decision, but why do we feel so upset with that decision in the first place? So now we dig into that. Well, did it go against my values, my morals, my ethics, whatever you want, right? It's usually a deeper meaning. Excuse me. So now we look at those two things, and then we put the pieces together. Well, if I can avoid this situation and not put myself in that situation again, solve for the events leading up to it, then understand and be more forgiving for ourselves, because we are human, right? We're not perfect. Understand the morals and the ethics, whatever. You need to understand why you don't like that decision. Put those together, and then ultimately you're learning a lesson out of that. You're learning how to avoid in a positive way, which is what we're going to lead into next, how to stay out of those situations. And when you learn something out of, let's say, a lesson, experience, and maybe a negative outcome, like some of these situations, then you're able to grow from that, and now you're emotionally tied to the experience of learning a lesson rather than the pain. So it kind of goes on a deeper level, right? You have the pain first. Well, if you address the pain, why did the pain happen? Now we understand why the pain happened. And then if we go further down from it, what can we learn from that? Now your emotions are from, if you learn something out of it, right? If you choose to learn something out of it, now your emotions go from hatred and anger to, it might have hurt in the moment, but I did learn something valuable from it. And then you can move on. And it makes it significantly easier to move on, at least in my experience, right? So now the second and ultimately kind of, I think they go together really well, is let's look at the other options. So we have forgiving ourselves, and I can make deeper and detailed videos about these later, but we're forgiving ourselves and addressing a situation with other people. Now you're like, well, what if I have a relationship, they're no longer in the picture, or let's say a family member, they're no longer in the picture, and I can't afford to bring them back in the picture, or I don't want to bring them back in the picture. Well, then we have to look at it differently. And again, this goes back to the learning something from it, right? So you obviously don't want to put these people back into your life because it hurt to have them there before, and having them there again will probably just make it worse. Or if you have no access to them, then it's going to be pretty hard to put them back in your life and understand their perspective, right? So if that's not an option for you, well, now we have to look at the experience, what we experience, the emotional ties to it. So if we're looking at it that way, we have the experience from the anger, the hurt, and we have the story that's tied to that experience. Now we have to look at that experience specifically. What happened, how it happened. If you want, you can look at the events leading up to it if it makes sense, right? And we just look at that as a whole of that situation. Now, you only have your understanding going into this situation, and that can be limiting in some ways, but at least at a minimal stint, you can learn, and if you choose to learn, dig into it, understand that it did hurt, but there's usually something positive that you can take out of it. And I'm not saying like, oh, I'll never trust this type of person. Again, I'll never trust a man or a woman, or I'll never work with this kind of person again. Not that kind of a lesson. It's more of that lesson is more of a negative, right? So it's a lesson, but it's negative, and then you're going to tie it to the negative emotion, right? I want to challenge you to look for a positive learning experience, a positive outcome from that situation. And if you can do that, now you have this hurt, and you're addressing that hurt, and you understand that hurt, and that's okay. Now what did we learn from that situation? Well, maybe that person? Is it someone I can trust? Maybe there's signs leading up to that situation that I can learn from that will, quote unquote, red flags, that we can look at to help us avoid those things in the future. Well, if you can do that, and that's pattern recognition, by the way. So if you can learn the patterns and say, hey, this is a pattern that escalated and got to the point where it did end up hurting me, well, we can use that later in life. And that's a positive lesson. Now, if it's a relationship or, a business consult, whatever, we also have to understand that everyone is different. While they may have similar tendencies, not every person has the same experience. And if they have similar experiences, they're not going to have the same reactions to those experiences, right? Because we all address something differently. You can say, hey, there's these two guys. Both of them had alcoholics' fathers. One said, well, I am successful this way. I have a lot of money because my dad was an alcoholic. The other one can say, well, I'm homeless and I'm an alcoholic and I'm a drunk because my dad was an alcoholic. Both same experiences, two different reactions from those people, right? And that's very simple. And that's what we're choosing, in every experience of our life, especially something of emotional significance. So, if we look at it that way, what's a positive thing that we can learn? And if we have a positive experience that is now emotionally correlated to that story or that situation of ourselves or what happened, we can move forward, and ultimately those feelings are valid still, and we understand that those are there, but we're able to move forward and learn something valuable out of it, right? And there's going to be situations where you may not have to go as deep of a level to learn something, but you're still there. And there's going to be situations where maybe in a relationship-wise, or like a 2 or 3 year long, friendship relationship that broke apart, you might have to sit there for a while and figure out what happened. So there's surface level, and then some of them you have to go deeper. And you have to be willing to go deeper, right, to be able to get to the bottom of that. But ultimately, it is my belief and a lot of other people's beliefs that there is something positive that you can get out of every experience. And there is a reason behind why things happen. So if you can kind of adopt that mindset and significance, maybe it can have an impact for you as well, if that makes sense, right? And it's been a significantly long time since I've been genuinely angry at people or at someone in general, especially like my most recent example really that lasted a long time is my grandmother. But it's because I either understand what happened and why it happened, and I was able to learn something. And I try and always learn something out of every experience that I get. Like with EMT, I'm very, very uncomfortable, but it forces me to be hyperactive and like I have to learn something from this so that I don't repeat this same uncomfortable mistake next time. And this isn't about forgiveness, but this is about learning and growing, right? So I'm looking at these situations as an EMT, and the thing that I struggled with most growing up and still today is starting conversations. Well, I'm starting conversations pretty much every day. As in, like, every patient, I'm starting the conversation. Hey, welcome, or not welcome, but hey, this is my name, I'm an EMT, whatever. So I have to learn to start those conversations. And it made me very uncomfortable at the start, but I was able to learn, and I forced myself. I have to figure out, yes, these were very uncomfortable, and I was very much embarrassed, and really badly embarrassed, actually. But I was able to take those experiences, sit and think on them, go deep enough to where I could pull out the lesson and not make that same mistake again. And that's the important part of this. If we're always choosing to learn rather than stay stuck in our head and choosing to move from those experiences, one, those negative experiences no longer hold anything against us. And if you're looking at it as a way, well, they don't deserve to be let off the hook. Well, by holding on to that, you're giving them power over you and your emotions. And that's got to suck worse, right? Because every time you think of them, now you're angry, now you're upset, now you're hurt. And you're giving them power over you in a way that they don't even have to try. And so if you have that perspective as well, what can we learn and then let go? Because we all like our freedom. Why would you want someone else to have control over those emotions? Let yourself be in control over those emotions and take the power away from someone else. And so that's about all I got. I didn't even really use this paper, but it's a good outline. And I like it. And I have this board behind me, but I don't know how to change effectively because there's only one tripod. So you're stuck looking at my face. But that's my take on forgiveness. And I've talked about forgiving multiple times throughout the life of this podcast. And I still stand by if you can learn something positive out of it, it helps you let go. It helps you move on. Because ultimately, that experience is behind us. And the past is the past for a reason. We don't need to keep holding on to it. But if we can learn something from it and help it let us move forward, then it makes it worth it, makes it valuable, and ultimately not a waste of time. Because we only have so much time here. And just like my nose, time is forever running away from us. So we gotta attack that stuff, right? That was a wimpy little fist bump, but we gotta attack it. You can't let it get the best of you.